Recently, the farming sim genre has exploded, not just in the number of farming sims we're getting, but also in the quality. For too long, the farming sim genre had been pretty stale, everything more or less offering the same experience, but recently we've seen an influx of unique and interesting farming sims. And with Farmageddon quickly approaching, or also known as September because there are a ton of farming sims coming in that month alone, I thought this would be the perfect time to kind of round up every single farming sim I've played so far. Now, before we get into the rankings, I do just quickly want to go over what makes a really good farming sim. To me, a good farming sim is just one that feels easy to play. One where I don't get frustrated at the controls every single time I try and do something. One that offers a kind of chill experience, like I don't want to constantly feel rushed to get things done every in-game day. And most importantly, something I'm looking for is the game to give me a reason to farm. This can either be part of the story or just an overarching goal, just something to motivate me to carry on playing so I can't put the game down. But to me, in order to be a true S-tier farming sim, you need to stand out. And to do that, it just needs to offer something a little bit more than the typical farming sim experience. We're talking a better story, more fleshed out characters, or just something else to do that no other game offers. But considering we have so many games on the list, let's get into this. First, let's talk about a game I've spoken about a ton, and that is Story of Seasons: A Wonderful Life. Now, this to me solves one of the biggest issues in farming sims, and that is just how repetitive they can feel. Because for me, after about year 2, everything just becomes exactly the same. You've mastered every single one of the events, so you know exactly what's going to happen. You're already max friendship with everyone in the town, and they just kind of say the same things, with no more cutscenes left to do. And after that point, it kind of more becomes a game about earning money so you can buy everything, and less about the other parts of farming sim life. But in Story of Seasons: A Wonderful Life, by introducing the passage of time, it has solved this problem. Unlike other farming sims, the game kind of gets split up into different chapters, and between each chapter, time jumps forward a number of years, and you get given a little cutscene to show you everything that's happened during that time period. Then when you start the game in a brand new year, everything has changed. Not only have you aged, but so has every single one of the characters in the town. And it's only when you wander around the town that you realize how much has changed. Not only do you get the appearance of brand new villagers, but also the villagers that you spoke to before have coupled up and had kids, and every single one of the in-game events are different. There's different villagers, you've got your kid experiencing all of them with you, and every single year seems to only get better. Now, I'm going to put this in the A tier, and that's mainly because I think they missed out on making this game fantastic by not spending enough time fleshing out the characters. This is obviously a farming sim that's less about farming and more about living a life. And I love that because it makes the characters feel more alive. It makes you feel like you're living a real life instead of just this grind for money. But it also means that every single time a character says the same dialogue over and over again, it kind of ruins it. Now, cutscenes and everything like that are fantastic, and those are the parts I really look forward to, but whenever you give them gifts, whenever you talk to them, each season they'll just reiterate the same lines, and it kind of gets a bit stale. Also, out of a lot of the farming sims we're going to talk about today, this probably has one of the slower starts, and it's definitely one of the most slow-paced farming sims on the list. Not necessarily a bad thing, but I know a lot of people had some very negative things to say in year 1, and then realized after that the game does get much, much better. But I did find myself at some points kind of rushing through the season to try and get to the next time jump, because after that is really when the game gets interesting. Then let's talk about Disney Dreamlight Valley. Now, this is hard because they've done some bad things to the game, they've done some great things more recently to the game, and obviously the Nintendo Switch port is by far the worst out of all of them. So I think I'm going to put it in the B tier, but if the new update does come out as well as I'm hoping, then maybe it'd make it back up into the A tier. Now, full disclosure, this is the game I have the most amount of hours in out of anything on this list, and I do very much enjoy it. However, not only is it not free to play, it is riddled with microtransactions as if it was already a free-to-play game. And I find it very hard to defend these microtransactions when an in-game umbrella costs more money than an in-real-life umbrella. Like, that's kind of where I draw the line on microtransactions. However, when I made my video about how I was not happy about the Disney Dreamlight Valley microtransactions, one thing I said was that they needed to find a way to reward players and not just reward people with money. And it looks like they have finally done that. Recently, they announced the addition of something called the Dream Snaps update. And this is basically where you get to submit a photo for a weekly challenge and players will vote for their favorite. The cool part about this is that everyone will earn moonstones for competing. So you earn moonstones for submitting a photo, and you also earn moonstones each week for voting on your favorites. And from my understanding, the higher you place, the more moonstones you get. And because these run every single week, this will give you the chance to earn upwards of 350 moonstones a week, which I adore because it gives people the chance to finally save up for the star path in a reasonable amount of time. The things I love about Disney Dreamlight Valley though is the stories you have with each of the characters, where you get to spend time with some of your favorite Disney and Pixar characters, but also the farming sim mechanics are pretty nice as well. One of the things I do particularly like about the farming sim mechanics in Disney Dreamlight Valley is the fact that the seeds will grow faster in the region you bought them from. So in theory, having multiple farms is better than having one big farm. And I believe this is the only farming sim on the entire list that runs on in real life time. But the nice thing is you don't have to wait days for the crops to grow. It is just a number of hours, which I am really a fan of. So it's going to go B tier for now, and that's purely because it has so many free-to-play mechanics in it right now, and it's still not free to play. So it will probably go up in this list when it actually becomes free, or if, because they still haven't mentioned anything. Next is Pretty Princess Magical Garden Island. It's going in the D tier. Now, if you're wondering why I'm being so harsh on it, it's basically because it costs way too much money. I do like everything that's going on, but it is an incredibly awkward game in terms of the controls. And also it plays like a mobile game that costs you £30 to play. It also takes a huge amount of inspiration from Animal Crossing New Horizons. Overall, I like everything the game's doing. I just wish it was a bit more streamlined and cost a lot less money than £30. Also, the sheep are incredibly cursed. So if you like the look of it and are intrigued to buy it, then definitely wait until it's on sale. Next is probably the most biased review I'm gonna give you, and that is Wildflowers. Now, I'm gonna put this in the S tier, purely because this was the perfect game for where I was in my life, and it will always have a special place in my heart. Now, when I talk about Wildflowers, people have a few issues about the idea of the game. The biggest two are the graphics, and also the fact that you don't get to play as yourself. Instead, you play the game as a character named Tara, who, after being dumped and fired from her job, moves to the town to take care of her very ill grandmother. But things really get interesting when she discovers that she's actually a witch. And in fact, on this island is an entire cult filled with witches and wizards. So not only is this a story of Tara restarting a brand new life on this island and letting go of the past, but it's also a story of her learning how to become a witch. And everything you do in terms of the farming sim mechanics has a sprinkle of witchcraft to it, which I absolutely love. But to me, I think the biggest thing this game shows is what a difference voice acting makes. Every single character you come across in Wildflowers is fully voice acted. And I mean absolutely every line is voice acted. There's not a single line of dialogue that doesn't have a voice to it. And I think to me that brought each and every character in the game to life. No matter what you think of the visuals, it's so easy to overlook when each of the characters has incredible voice acting. At first, I was a little bit unsure of the farming sim mechanics. And as I grew my farm and I grew the amount of animals I had, I began feeling really overwhelmed and was a little bit unsure about even continuing the game. Given that there is so much story and so much dialogue to do outside of it, I felt like I was wasting so much time that I could be spending doing the story on just taking care of my farm. And that's when I realized they actually give you tools to automate almost all of the farming. Once you get to a certain point in the story, you can basically get these bots that do just about everything for you. They can water your plants, they can take care of your animals, not only feeding them, but also collecting all of their resources. And you can even get robots to go into the mines and get you resources there as well. So you can basically choose what out of the farming sim mechanics you want to do yourself versus what you want to automate. The recent updates to the game have also introduced even more than just your bog standard farming sim mechanics. So now, instead of just taking care of the animals, you can also breed rare versions of magical animals as well. And given how cute they are, it's been a lot of fun to do. You also have a greenhouse which you can expand over time as well that allows you to grow crops over any season. And there's also been updates to the whole romance side of the game as well, which I've thoroughly enjoyed. Out of every single game on today's list, this has not only the best story, but is also one of the only games to be voice acted in English. Voice acting is so rare in farming sims, and that's why I think it deserves the S tier, and I wish more farming sims would do it. We've gone from one of the best to one of the worst. Let's talk about Story of Seasons Pioneers of Olive Town. Now, it's definitely not as bad as Pretty Princess, okay? I fully acknowledge that this definitely isn't as overpriced and isn't quite as clunky, but me and Pioneers of Olive Town have had issues. I think the best way to describe this is like a bog standard bare minimum farming sim. It does everything it says on the tin and nothing more. The controls are fine, they're just a bit awkward and a bit clunky. The processing mechanics are also awkward and a bit clunky, and the mining mechanics are also awkward and a bit clunky. And on top of all of that, the town is just a little bit dead, and every festival that I had played in the game, you just watched. You didn't take part as a player whatsoever. So whilst this ticked every single one of the farming sim boxes in terms of what it gives you, because it gave me absolutely nothing more, it went to the C tier. And for that reason, it's probably the farming sim I enjoyed the least. I mean, at least Pretty Princess gave me a laugh because it ripped off so much from Animal Crossing. However, Story of Seasons Friends of Mineral Town, despite being the older Story of Seasons game, managed to beat it in terms of just feeling a little bit more alive to me. And I also preferred the mechanics, so I'm going to put it in B tier. This was just animated better, and I don't really know why they dropped so much of what made Mineral Town good for Pioneers of Olive Town, as if we ignore their remake of a 20-year-old game. Everything in Story of Seasons is just okay. So fingers crossed that next time we talk about a Story of Seasons game, I am praising how much further they've come along, because otherwise they're going to get left behind by the likes of Coral Island. I don't really know where I'm going to put this because I feel like it could be S tier, but also it's unfinished right now, and I feel like it's unfair to put an unfinished game in S tier. So we're going to go A tier, and then when I play the 1.0 update, it could get elevated to S tier. Now, if we're talking about farming sims that have really elevated the game, I think Coral Island has created this new baseline, and that's purely because of the amount of content Coral Island has packed into it. This has the most amount of villagers I have ever spoken to in a farming sim, and despite having one of the biggest farming sim maps out of every game on this list, somehow the whole island comes alive because of the amount of people who are walking around doing their everyday life while you do yours. I've also noticed that since the release of Coral Island, more and more games have offered what they had as one of their biggest selling points, which is the ability to customize how long an in-day game lasts. To me, this is an absolutely incredible thing to put in a farming sim. After all, farming sims aren't competitive, you're not playing with other people, so if you want to make an in-game day longer so you can get more done and you feel less pressed for time, why not allow people to do that? I absolutely love it. Now, one of the big strengths of Coral Island compared to other farming sims is the overarching story that goes on alongside everything else you do in your normal farming sim life. And this is a story all about conservation, Mother Nature, not only trying to protect the town, but also bring it back to its former glory. And they definitely needed to allow you to make the days longer because there is so much to do. Not only can you do the normal farming, mining, fishing and catching bugs, along with a museum that you can hand this all into. There's also the ability to collect fossils, which I haven't really seen since Animal Crossing, but also the ability to go diving and explore the depths of the ocean. Now, this to me is one of my favorite parts for a number of reasons. First of all, despite the fact that you're diving under the water, it's actually really chill. All you really have to do is explore and clean up the ocean. But my favorite part, which I don't think we've been able to play yet, is the introduction of mer people. Now, I feel like every farming sim should have mer people in it because it's such a cool addition. And I think later on, I think this is after the game fully releases, you will be able to even date the mer people, which I'm very interested to see because I don't really know how that's going to work. Is it going to be like Little Mermaid style? Are they going to grow legs? Or will you only be able to date when you're in your scuba gear? Who knows? But either way, I'm very interested in the logistics. But the thing I definitely love the most is Coral Island gives you a purpose to basically everything that you do. Much like the likes of Stardew Valley, you have these bundles that you kind of need to complete. These include things that you get from your animals on your ranch, but also different crops that you can grow and different levels of crops as well. But as I said earlier, there's also the overarching story, which includes trying to get your town's grade up. And this takes into account anything from how many bundles you've completed to how clean the ocean is, and a ton of different aspects that basically mean that you'll never feel like you have nothing to do. Now, as I said earlier, this is currently in early access. I think the 1.0 update is expected to be kind of soon, and we know that the Nintendo Switch version will be at least 3 months following the 1.0 release. So I'm expecting it to be early 2024, hopefully, that we see it on the Switch. But I really do feel like because Coral Island had this huge period of time where it was in early access, it really has thought of everything. It's taken everyone's feedback and made this smooth, slick, streamlined farming sim that is going to give so many hours of joy. So I cannot wait till it's fully released. We mentioned Stardew Valley. I should probably cover Stardew Valley. It's going to go in the S tier, okay? Now, before you say it, yes, I know Stardew Valley wasn't the first farming sim, and yes, I know it took its inspiration from the old school Harvest Moon games. However, I will say this is probably the game that has kind of rekindled a lot of people's love in farming sims, and it's the farming sim that literally never dies. And the fact that we're still getting updates for Stardew Valley is absolutely wild. But I do feel like Stardew Valley has the best farming sim mechanics of any single game on this list. Playing it with a mouse or a controller, the farming sim mechanics just feel slick and easy to do. The animations aren't too long. You don't feel frustrated at any point with the controls, apart from sometimes in the mines. But overall, it created the modern day standard for farming sims, and I absolutely love it. Next is Ooblets, and I'm going to put it in the A tier purely because it is a wee bit glitchy, so I don't think it deserves quite the S tier, because whilst I love everything that it's doing, the glitches do take away from the experience. It kind of gives a purpose to farming in games that no other farming sim has even come close to. And I just love how it's so unique. If you've never heard of Ooblets before, it is a game with so much character. Essentially, whilst you do have a farm on your island, the game is kind of a mesh between farming sim and also monster collecting. So there are these monsters or adorable things called Ooblets, and you'll find them scattered all around the world. And basically you can dance battle them, and if you succeed, they'll give you a seed which you can then grow on your farm, and it will grow into an Ooblet, which you can then have on your team. The farming sim mechanics themselves kind of serve as a way to get money and also resources that allow you to dance battle these Ooblets you find in the wild. And then essentially you use the Ooblets you find to do the main story, which involves you wandering around this world trying to reinstall the internet. For me, I love the fact that this just works. There's a story, the farming has a purpose to it as well, and doesn't kind of feel like a weird addition. And also the Ooblets are just so cute. I love them so much. But genuinely one of my favorite games and farming sims. I just love how it took the genre and took it to a place that no one had really done before. Then we have Everdream Valley. Again, wonderfully unique, but actually very buggy on the Switch. So it's going C tier, but if it wasn't so buggy, B, maybe A tier. The thing I loved about Everdream Valley is it didn't really focus on what most other farming sims focus on. Like, yeah, you can have crops and traditional farms and that kind of thing, but what it really focuses on is animals. And not only do you have to take care of the animals, you also have to go and find them. I think a good example of how much focus this has on animals is your dog. In most farming sims, like Story of Seasons and Wonderful Life, your dog is basically a cosmetic item. They sit there, they look cute, you might be able to pet them or stroke them or carry them, but that's about it. In Everdream Valley, your dog is most definitely a working dog. Like, for example, if you want to go find a certain animal, you can give it a feather or something to sniff and it will take you to the animal. Or if you're trying to collect or herd something like sheep, you can actually use your dog as an actual sheepdog, allowing you to kind of herd the sheep to whichever direction you want to go. And Everdream Valley goes even further, and each night when you go to sleep, there's a chance you'll get this little mini game where you control one of the animals on your farm, and if you do well, you kind of get these benefits to your farm for the foreseeable future. The only downside is you do get attacked by wolves and goose, and I know a lot of people get really stressed out by the wolves mini game because they basically eat your sheep. And whilst there is a mode on PC that allows you to make the wolves friendly, that isn't on the Switch yet, so I know a lot of people have been stressed out. As I said, fantastic game. I love the elements of taking care of animals. There's more animals in this than any other farming sim on this list. Graphics aren't great on the Switch, bit buggy on every platform, but I can't wait to see what they do once they update it. Another farming sim going in C tier for me is Hoko Life. This is mainly for the way it looks and plays on the Switch. There were a few elements I really like that made this stand out. The biggest one being the ability to customize and make your own furniture, which is a really cool addition to the game. But for me, this definitely felt clunky in the same way the Story of Seasons games can feel clunky. And the thing that really destroyed this for me on the Switch was the loading times. You'd often need to run between your farm and also the shops, but that had a huge loading scene in between the two that really slowed down the pace of the game and got a little bit frustrating over time. Not a bad game, didn't run great on the Switch, so we're going C tier. Another game going in C tier is probably going to be Akka. I loved so much of what it was doing. However, it's buggy on the Switch and also the controls are really hard. The things Akka did really well was the overarching story and also just the cute factor. You could have a nap on a capybara. What more do you want in life? But you play as Akka, a red panda who basically comes here to relax post-war, and you kind of go around, explore and talk to the kind of animal villagers around the island, and they kind of give you a backstory about their life and how the war affected them, and you then spend your time helping them out as you find them. And whilst there was no overarching goal of the story, exploring was a lot of fun and it was a reward in its own way, but the farming not only had no purpose, it was just incredibly awkward, and it was also just a bit of a short game. So I do love it, but yeah, there are some big downsides, especially from the farming sim side of things. Then we have Doraemon Story of Seasons. This is specifically the second one because I haven't played the first one, and I'm going to put it in B tier. Now, I actually think this is one of the better Story of Seasons games. And that's mainly because whilst the farming sim mechanics are more of the same, there is so much charm in the world and the story that it brings you. You play as the kids from the TV show Doraemon. And essentially there's this overarching story of them basically leaving Earth, crash landing in this strange world where they then end up helping this boy on their farm in a quest to try and make their way back home. The story is really charming, and a part of me really loves the fact that you kind of help out all these villagers around the town with no possibility of romance. And instead, some of the quests you do actually helps out some of the characters where you get to learn a little bit more about them and even try and help them out romancing each other. That kind of made the whole world feel alive, and I also just fell in love with the art style. The only reason I'm putting it in B tier is I just didn't find myself going back to it as much as I thought I was going to. So I like it, just not as much as the other ones. Next is Slime Rancher, and I put this in the list because when I made my video about the best farming sims on the Nintendo Switch right now, you guys said I left out Slime Rancher. And whilst I didn't see it as being a farming sim, you can farm, but I feel like the farming's more with what you do with the slimes and less what you do with actual crops. But we're going to include it from popular demand and it's going in the A tier. If you guys have seen any of my previous videos, you know I love Slime Rancher. It is such a chill and fun experience, and it is, again, nothing like anything else on this list. It's way better in every single way, and I can't wait for that to come to the Switch. But basically, in this, you have a ranch of slimes, and every time you feed a slime, it gives you this thing called a plort, and selling these is how you get your money. Each of the different types of slime are unique. They have different abilities, different temperaments, and a different diet as well. And this is where the farming comes into it, because you need to take care of chickens to feed the slimes, and also grow different fruits and vegetables for the slimes that are vegetarian. The thing I loved the most was the exploring. With an absolutely huge expanse of land to go off and explore, and you can use the money from your slimes to upgrade your equipment so you can make it further and find more exotic slimes that are more dangerous or more picky eaters. If that isn't enough for you, you can also kind of crossbreed the slimes as well. And doing this will kind of mix their temperaments and also their diets together. The slimes do become much bigger in the process, but just be careful because you can only crossbreed your slimes once. If they then crossbreed for a third time, they become these rainbow sludge monsters and will devour every slime in its path. So just be careful. It's just chaotic in the best way. I always have a great time playing it. I feel like no one really speaks about it anymore. I know it's dated, but it still is a lot of fun. So yeah, if you're looking for a farming sim that's very different to every farming sim on this list, this is your one. Then we have Lonesome Village. I'm going to put this in the B tier. Again, it's a little bit buggy on the Switch. And I just love the fact that although you can farm, that isn't actually the overarching mechanic of the game, and I kind of enjoy when farming sims are not just about the farming. I think the best way to describe this is a puzzle game with a small element of life/farming sim. As I said, you can technically have a farm, but it doesn't really do a whole lot. To me, the strength of Lonesome Village is when you try and save each and every one of the villagers by going into the tower. You don't know how or why the villagers got in there. All you know is when you solve the puzzle on each floor, a villager is freed. And the puzzles are definitely the strength of Lonesome Village. Each of the puzzles on each floor is so unique and so different. And I love the fact that they kind of incorporate the life sim elements into the tower, because sometimes you'll be stuck and the only way you can get through is by using a certain item, which you can only get by helping some of the villagers with their own quests. And that kind of brings in the life sim elements to the game and makes sure that you don't just play the puzzles, which I also love. Again, I just love how this is a story-based farming sim, but in a different way to every other farming sim we have on this list. And it's a lot of fun. Just know that you will come across the odd glitch. Then we have Harvestella, which now you can see. I'm going S tier, which I think is controversial. I think a lot of people would say it's A, maybe B. Now, out of all of the farming sims on this list, this definitely has the hardest combat, as this is actually half farming sim, half RPG, and it does them both so well. And somehow both of them enhance the other one, which I also love. The thing that really makes Harvestella special is the story. Now, admittedly, there's no real cutscenes, there's also no voice acting, and I think if it had those, this would be in my top 5 Switch games list. That's how strong the story is. You wake up in this town during the event called the Quietus, or as they call it, the Season of Death. And essentially during this time, there's this powder that falls from the sky, meaning that you can't even leave your house, because if you do, this powder will kill you. It also destroys every single one of the crops in the garden. And the issue is, the Season of Death just seems to be getting longer every time it rolls around. So naturally, it becomes your job to try and figure out what this is and how to solve it. Now, the world building in Harvestella is absolutely incredible. And not only do you have a gripping story to do for the main story, but there's also a ton of side quests that you can do, and also character quests to get to know each and every one of your partners even more. And actually, I found myself getting really emotional from some of the side quests. They're done really, really well, although annoyingly, they reuse the characters so often that it got really frustrating and a little bit confusing, because you'd think you're speaking to the same person you spoke to in the town before, but it's not. It's actually just a completely different character. They just reused the entire character in another town. For the most part, this plays like a normal RPG. You have a story, you have quests, you have different combat styles called jobs, that you can level up the more you use them. But the cool thing is, you actually own a house that you return to each and every day. So every single day when you start the game, you'll wake up in your house and you have to travel to wherever you want to go and do a quest or a side quest. Farming sim wise though, this does a number of different things. First of all, your farm will be your main source of revenue income. You can then use this money to go and upgrade your tools or buy different things to help you out on your journey. But you can also use the stuff from your farm to make food, and this food is the way you're going to recoup your stamina and HP for when you go into big battles. So this essentially means that your farm is incredibly important and you have a reason to be tending to your farm each and every day, but obviously it's not the biggest part of the game. It's just something you do alongside to help you out. The story will easily take you 70 hours, even more if you decide to do each and every one of the side quests. And as I said, the story is incredible. I just wish it was voice acted, but this is a really unique take on a farming sim, and I love the way they incorporated two of my favorite genres. Then we have Roots of Pacha. Now I'm gonna also put this in, I'm going A because it is pretty unique. Roots of Pacha is basically a prehistoric farming sim. Now, whilst you can do all your classic farming sim stuff, you have different seasons with different crops, you can take care of animals, and also go out to the mines. There's an overarching story that goes alongside of it, and a really interesting mechanic that's essentially research. So to begin with, you basically start with just a pointy rock. You can use this to plow the land and get rid of things like grass, but other than that, you can't do a whole lot with it. However, it isn't long before a villager thinks, hey, maybe I can make this certain item that can help you do your farming a little bit easier. And this villager has the idea to make tools, and it's kind of up to you to provide them everything they need for this idea. They'll then make it and give it to you. And that is essentially the whole premise of the game. As you kind of progress and give the town more resources, more of the villagers will have ideas that kind of elevate the town further. This can be things as simple as making bridges, installing lighting, but as you go, these get more and more complex and you elevate your little town further and further. And whilst doing this, you also have the overarching story that is trying to help out and tend to Mother Nature. This is more or less just an achievement system, and the more achievements you get, the further you elevate your town. I love this mesh between almost like science and farming sim mechanics. The whole concept of research I find so interesting, and it's such a fun take on a farming sim. And I even love the fact that the mines are different, with there being certain puzzles you need to solve every time you go into the mines. Overall, this has been a really fun game. I will just say though, the chances of this coming to the Switch anytime soon is slim. But the nice thing is, when this does come out, it's already fully controller compatible, and the controls for the controller are some of the best I have ever seen. It's very clear that they had a controller in mind from the very start. I just can't wait for you all to experience it. Then we have Sunhaven, which I'm also going to put in the A tier. Now this is the polar opposite, and one of the biggest things letting it down is how bad the controls are on controller. It's genuinely so bad that the only way I can play it on Steam Deck is to remap one of the trackpads to be a mouse, because it's so much easier to use a mouse than use the controller controls. I genuinely think that the main reason this hasn't come to console yet is the controller controls, so hopefully they're working on it. And I believe they said that their aim is to get this on the Switch before the end of the year, so we don't have too long to wait. But this is honestly one of my favorite farming sims. If you're looking for value for money, then Sunhaven has you covered. And it's basically a farming sim with a lot of magic thrown in. And you get to see this from the moment you click new game, with the character customization getting you to pick from a number of different magical races and allowing you to customize everything down to which pair of wings you have. And the thing I found absolutely wild is when you start the game, you get to see how massive the starting town is, only to find out this is one of 3 towns that you can explore in the game. The scale of the game is absolutely insane. This has basically everything you could think of in a farming sim. There's farming, mining, romance, animals to take care of, and a fantastic story to go alongside of it. You can also have mounts and pets as well, which can follow you everywhere. But the cool part is, not only are there an insane amount of crops on the island you start off on, but as you do the story and you uncover different towns, you find out that you can have a different farm at every single town you're at. And not only that, but you also have a different house at every town, meaning that you can decorate multiple houses if you want to. Out of all the farming sims on the list, this is probably the game which you could spend the most amount of hours in. And despite the fact that I'm like 20 or 30 hours into it, I feel like I've barely scratched the surface. Now, saying that, there are a few faults to the game, the biggest one being the museum. As the game is so big and has so many different crops and animals and everything like that, the museum is just as big to kind of incorporate it all. But unfortunately, that means the museum is really hard to navigate, as you can't just hand over the items and they place them in there for you. Instead, you have to kind of find the right bundle for each item and place them in yourself. And when there are so many items, it makes the museum incredibly overwhelming. But I just love the entire vibe of Sunhaven. It has been so much fun to play. And once they figure out these controller controls and just streamline the experience a little bit more, it's going to be fantastic. Those are my farming sim rankings. But if you want to see the games I am the most excited for that are coming up soon, click this video here.